The afternoon sun poured lazily through the kitchen window, painting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. I wiped the sweat from my brow, hands rough and calloused from years of work that no one ever seemed to notice. The faucet had been leaking for weeks, the fence slanted crookedly toward the garden, and the living room floorboards squeaked in complaint under every footstep. I had taken it upon myself, as I always did, to fix the house that had held our family together for decades. I hummed softly, a tune my mother used to sing while kneading bread, letting the rhythm steady my hands as I tightened screws and hammered nails. In this house, I had raised children, cleaned up after storms, and stitched together broken dreams along with broken furniture. And yet, in this moment, the memory of all those sacrifices felt heavier than any toolbox in my hands. Why pay a builder when mom's free labor? The words landed like a stone thrown into a quiet pond, sending ripples of shock through me. I froze mid-swing, hammer in hand, staring at the figure of my own child standing in the doorway. The casualness in their tone, the careless shrug, was worse than any sharp word or deliberate insult. It was entitlement. It was disregard. It was betrayal wrapped in the guise of humor. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Memories flashed before my eyes. The late nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the countless dinners I made while sick, the arguments I swallowed to keep peace in the house. Each act, once a labor of love, now seemed reduced to a punchline. The ache in my chest wasn't just from the insult. It was from realizing that years of devotion had been taken for granted, dismissed as though my very effort were nothing more than a convenience. I set the hammer down quietly, the clink of metal against wood sounding like a final note in a sad symphony. "I'll take care of it," I said softly, my voice steady but laced with a calm fire. There was no anger in my tone, only the quiet assertion of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. As I bent down to examine the floorboards again, I could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about a leaky faucet or a crooked fence. It was about recognition, about respect, about being seen for the labor and love I had poured into every corner of this house. I had spent decades giving, and now I realized that sometimes giving without boundaries only teaches people to take. I worked through the afternoon, each nail driven and each plank secured not only to repair the house, but as a statement of my worth. The work became a meditation, a reclaiming of dignity, each motion reinforcing the truth I had long known. My value wasn't measured by approval or gratitude, but by the strength and care I brought into every action. By the time the sun began its descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, the repairs were complete. The fence stood straight and strong, the faucet no longer dripped, and the floorboards sang underfoot instead of creaking. I stood back, surveying the fruits of my labor, and felt something stir inside me, a quiet, simmering determination. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't confront my child then. That moment of betrayal deserved more than a hasty reaction. It deserved thought, planning, and the measured response of someone who had spent a lifetime giving freely and now understood that respect must be earned, not assumed. I left the tools neatly arranged and stepped inside, already forming the plan that would ensure my labor, my love, and my dignity were no longer taken for granted. This house, these walls, and this life had taught me patience. And patience, I realized, could be a more formidable force than any hammer in my hand. That evening, I sat at the old oak table, a cup of tea cooling beside me, and let the house settle into silence. The gentle tick of the wall clock seemed louder than usual, each second echoing in the hollow space left by unspoken truths. I thought about the day, the hammer in my hand, the drip of the faucet, the crooked fence, and the words that had cut deeper than any tool ever could. Why pay a builder when mom's free labor? I replayed it again and again, each repetition sharpening the sting. And yet, beneath the hurt, a strange clarity began to form. I realized that anger alone would not give me the justice I sought. Yelling, crying, or lecturing would only satisfy the moment, leaving the deeper wounds unhealed. If I wanted to protect myself and teach a lesson that would endure, I had to be deliberate. I had to be methodical. For decades, I had given freely, often to the point of exhaustion, believing that love and loyalty were enough. But love without boundaries, I now understood, invited exploitation. And this time, I wouldn't allow it. Not again. The idea came quietly, like a whisper carried by the wind through the open window. I would take control, legally, firmly, and irrevocably. If they thought my labor was free, then they would learn in the most unassailable way that my time, my effort, and my rights were valuable. The next morning, I rose before the sun, moving through the house with deliberate precision. I gathered all documents I could find. Deeds, receipts, past contracts, even the small notes I had tucked away from years of managing household finances. Each paper felt heavier than its weight in ink and parchment, for in them lay the proof of a life lived responsibly, diligently, and independently. With the stack of documents under my arm, I made my way to the lawyer's office. The street was quiet, the early light reflecting off the frost-kissed pavements, and I felt a strange thrill of anticipation. I had never imagined that my life of care and labor would lead me to this moment of assertion, but it had, and I would meet it head-on. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for fairness and efficiency, listened intently as I explained the situation. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I stated facts. The repairs I had made, the years of unpaid labor, the dismissive words spoken. I asked pointed questions about property rights, legal protection for elderly homeowners, and ways to formalize boundaries that had long been ignored. As I spoke, I felt a surge of empowerment. Each question, each answer, built a framework of strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The lawyer's nods, the careful note-taking, and the assurance that the law could back my claim stirred a sense of calm determination within me. This was no longer about hurt feelings. It was about protection, recognition, and justice. By the time I left the office, the sun was high, casting light across the streets that seemed almost symbolic of the clarity I had gained. I walked home slowly, imagining the look of surprise when boundaries were enforced, when respect was demanded, not begged for. I thought of the fence I had repaired, the leaky faucet, the floorboards I had strengthened, and realized that this home, my home, was now more than walls and wood. It was a statement of who I was, and I would no longer allow it to be taken for granted. As I crossed the threshold, the scent of baked bread reminded me of decades of service and sacrifice. But now, that same life of dedication was tempered with resolve. I would not be cruel, nor would I be vindictive for its own sake. My actions would be measured, my lessons lasting, and my dignity unshaken. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet thrill of empowerment. I had been betrayed, yes, but I was not broken. The quiet resolution had taken root, and with it came the certainty that the next steps, careful, precise, and entirely under my control, would ensure that respect, once taken for granted, would be recognized. And somewhere deep inside, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The game had just begun. Weeks passed, and life in the house began to change, not outwardly at first, but in subtle, undeniable ways. I went about my daily routines as before, fixing leaky faucets, tending the garden, and keeping the house in order. But now every action carried a quiet, firm intention. I would no longer be invisible. My labor, once freely given, would be respected, or it would be accounted for. The first shift came quietly, almost imperceptibly. My child asked me to repair a stubborn door hinge, the same casual tone lingering in their voice. I looked up from my work, hammer in hand, and spoke calmly without anger. Of course I can fix it, but from now on, my work is my time. If it's urgent, we'll set terms. The pause that followed was longer than any hesitation I had encountered before. Their eyes widened slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing features usually so confident and entitled. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I merely returned to my work, letting the weight of my words settle like dust on the floorboards. Next came the formal steps I had prepared with my lawyer. I updated the property documents, ensuring that my contributions were legally recognized, and put in place clear boundaries regarding labor expectations. I drafted agreements for household maintenance and improvements, simple yet firm, and left copies on the kitchen table, visible, unavoidable, and binding. It wasn't about punishment. It was about teaching a lesson that could not be ignored. Slowly, the air in the house began to shift. Where entitlement had once ruled, respect began to take root. Requests for help became polite, and when my labor was offered, it was met with gratitude rather than assumption. The house itself seemed lighter, freer, as if it too recognized the shift in energy. One afternoon, while fixing a creaking stair, my child lingered nearby, attempting conversation. There was hesitance in their voice, a subtle attempt to reconnect, perhaps even to apologize without saying it outright. I listened quietly, responding with measured words that conveyed both patience and authority. You know, I said, pausing to tighten a screw. When I was your age, I worked hard for my family too. I never asked for credit, but I also never expected to be treated as invisible. The words hung between us, simple yet powerful. I saw recognition flicker in their eyes. A dawning realization that the woman they had long dismissed was not just capable, but formidable in her own right. The sweetest moment came unexpectedly. My child approached me, timid yet sincere, offering to hire a professional for the next project. The line, once so casually thrown, had been replaced by respect and acknowledgement. I know you could do it yourself, they said quietly, but I want to pay you, or at least have it done properly. I allowed myself a small smile, not of triumph over cruelty, but of quiet satisfaction. The lesson had been learned, not through anger, not through shouting, but through the steady assertion of boundaries and the recognition of worth. My labor was no longer invisible. It was acknowledged, valued, and respected. As evening fell, I stood by the window, looking out over the garden I had tended for decades. The sunlight kissed the flowers, the repaired fence cast long shadows, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep, abiding sense of justice. I had been betrayed, yes, and I had felt the sting of dismissal, but I had turned that betrayal into empowerment, showing that strength, patience, and careful planning could be more effective than anger. In the quiet of the house, I hummed the old tune my mother had sung. The melody carried a new meaning now. Not just of memory, but of triumph, of dignity reclaimed, and of respect earned. I had acted not out of spite, but out of love for myself. And in doing so, I had ensured that the lessons of a lifetime were finally understood. The house was whole again, and so, in a way, was I. The house had grown quiet again, but this time it was different. It was the calm that follows not a storm, but a reckoning. I walked through each room slowly, fingertips brushing the polished wood of the floorboards, the cool metal of the faucet I had fixed, the steady fence outside that now stood straight and strong. Everything bore the marks of my hands, my labor, my care, but also my boundaries. I realized, with a quiet, almost startling clarity, that this home had always been more than walls and beams. It was a reflection of who I was, resilient, patient, and unyielding when it mattered most. Sitting in my favorite chair by the window, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Betrayal had once cut through me like a sharp blade, leaving a sting that seemed impossible to soothe. The words had echoed in my mind. Why pay a builder when mom's free labor? How easily they dismissed decades of care, years of devotion, and countless acts of love. I had felt invisible, used, and unappreciated, but now, I saw that those moments of pain had been the catalysts for a deeper understanding of myself. I had learned that respect cannot be assumed, nor can loyalty be taken for granted. It must be earned, nurtured, and sometimes demanded. And while it had been painful to arrive at this truth, the journey had also been empowering. I had discovered a strength I had always possessed but had never fully claimed. The ability to protect myself, assert my worth, and turn betrayal into a lesson that could not be ignored. The transformation in my child had been subtle but undeniable. Where once entitlement ruled, a new awareness had taken root. Gratitude replaced assumption, and hesitation gave way to recognition. They no longer expected my labor for free. They acknowledged it, valued it, and even sought ways to honor it. Watching this change, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not the thrill of revenge, but the serenity of justice well executed. I thought of my own mother then, the woman whose voice I had hummed all those afternoons while working. She had taught me to give freely, to care deeply, and to endure hardships with quiet grace. But she had also taught me, indirectly, the importance of standing firm when others failed to see your value. I now understood her lessons more fully than ever. Strength is not only in giving, but in knowing when to say enough. Outside, the garden thrived. Each flower, each sturdy plant, seemed to mirror the inner growth I had undergone. I had nurtured it through seasons of labor, patience, and care, just as I had nurtured this home and my family. And just as the garden flourished under my hands, so too had my sense of self-worth. I realized that the legacy I would leave was not only in walls, fences, or repairs, but in the example of dignity, resilience, and wisdom. I smiled softly, thinking of the stories I could share with my grandchildren one day. The lessons of life, love, and respect. They would hear how betrayal can sting, how patience and intelligence can transform pain into power, and how standing up for oneself does not diminish kindness or love. They would understand, through my words and example, that dignity is not given, it is claimed. And so, as the evening sun cast long golden shadows across the house, I felt a deep sense of completion. The repairs were not only physical, they were emotional and moral, a testament to a life lived with care, strength, and principle. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully recognized, not just by law, but by those who mattered most. I hummed my mother's tune once more, letting it fill the rooms with warmth and memory. This house, my home, and my life had become a story of respect reclaimed, lessons learned, and a legacy that would endure. I had turned betrayal into empowerment, and in doing so, I had finally found the peace that comes from knowing your worth, and ensuring that no one ever takes it for granted again.